The rain hadn't let up for 3 days. It drummed against the window pane like a warning, steady and cold, matching the rhythm of her heartbeat. She sat on the edge of the bed, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the suitcase open on the floor. It wasn't much, just a worn navy duffel she'd bought at a thrift store years ago, back when things still felt light. Now it held everything she dared take: 2 changes of clothes, her passport, a small photo of her grandmother, a toothbrush, and the emergency cash she'd been slipping into a coffee can under the sink for months. $532. Not enough to start over maybe, but enough to get far. She hadn't slept. Not really. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. The way it twisted when he didn't get his way. The coldness in his eyes when he called her dramatic, after shoving her into the kitchen counter hard enough to leave a bruise shaped like a doorknob. He'd apologized the next morning with flowers and promises, like always. But this time something inside her had snapped. Not loudly, not with shouting. Just a quiet final click like a lock turning from the inside. She'd waited until he left for his morning run. She knew his routine better than her own. 6 miles, same route. Always came back sweaty and smug, expecting breakfast ready. She didn't make breakfast. She zipped the bag, slipped on her oldest sneakers, and walked out the front door without looking back. The air outside was thick with mist and the smell of wet pavement. Her hands shook as she hailed a cab, giving the driver the address of the nearest Greyhound station, not her own neighborhood. At the station, she bought a one-way ticket east. Didn't care where as long as it wasn't here. The bus was half empty, smelling of stale coffee and damp wool. She took a window seat in the back, pressing her forehead against the cool glass as the city shrank behind her. She didn't cry, not yet. There was too much fear crowding out the sadness. Fear that he'd come after her. Fear that he already knew. Fear that no matter how far she ran, his voice would still echo in her head, telling her she was nothing without him. She slept in fits and starts during the long ride, waking each time the bus stopped, heart pounding, scanning the platform for his face. By the time they pulled into Atlantic City just after dusk, her body ached and her nerves were frayed. She stepped off the bus into a world lit by neon and salt air. The boardwalk stretched out before her, crowded with tourists laughing under umbrellas, arcade music spilling from open doorways, the distant crash of waves against the shore. It should have felt freeing. Instead, it felt overwhelming. Too many eyes, too many places to hide, and too many places to be found. She found a cheap motel 2 blocks from the boardwalk, paying cash for a room with thin walls and a flickering light above the bed. She locked the door, pushed a chair under the knob, and sat on the floor with her back against it, listening to every sound from the hallway. For 2 days, she barely left the room. She ordered takeout, kept the curtains drawn, and checked her phone only for news alerts. No missed calls, no texts. Just silence. Maybe he hadn't noticed she was gone yet. Or maybe he was waiting. On the 3rd night, restless and hungry, she decided to walk. Just to stretch her legs, to feel something other than the 4 walls closing in. She pulled on a hoodie, tucked her hair under a baseball cap, and walked toward the marina where the lights were softer and the crowds thinner. The air smelled of fish and diesel, and the wind off the ocean carried a chill that cut through her jacket. She passed a few couples, a group of teenagers smoking near a railing, a lone fisherman casting his line into the dark water. For a moment, she almost felt normal. Then she saw it. Down the street, idling at a red light, was his car. Black SUV, tinted windows, the dent on the rear fender from when he'd slammed it into a pole during an argument. Her breath caught in her throat. She ducked behind a newspaper stand, heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. The light changed. The SUV turned slowly onto the street she was on. Panic flooded her, sharp and electric. She couldn't run, not without drawing attention. She couldn't hide in an alley. He'd check everyone. Her eyes darted around, desperate. Across the street, a restaurant glowed warmly. Soft light spilling onto the sidewalk, the sound of low chatter and clinking glasses drifting out an open door. Without thinking, she crossed quickly, pushed through the heavy wooden door, and stepped inside. The place was elegant but not flashy. Dark wood, white tablecloths, the scent of garlic and rosemary in the air. A few well-dressed patrons sat at tables, speaking in quiet tones. At the far end of the bar, a man sat alone, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark suit that looked expensive without trying too hard. He had his back to the door, nursing a glass of something amber-colored. She didn't plan it. It just happened. As the door swung shut behind her, she moved fast, slipping behind the man at the bar like a shadow, pressing herself against the wall just beside him, out of direct view from the entrance. Her breath came in short gasps. She kept her head down, hands clenched into fists at her sides, praying he wouldn't turn around, wouldn't ask questions, wouldn't make a scene. But he did turn. Slowly, deliberately, as if he'd sensed her before she even entered. His eyes met hers, dark, calm, unreadable. He didn't look startled, didn't frown, just studied her for a long moment, taking in her wide eyes, her trembling hands, the way she kept glancing toward the door like a trapped animal. Outside, tires crunched on gravel. The SUV had parked, her stomach dropped. She wanted to bolt, but her legs wouldn't move. The man at the bar followed her gaze to the window. Then, without a word, he shifted slightly, angling his body so that she was completely hidden behind him. He didn't touch her, didn't speak. Just became a wall between her and the door. The restaurant door opened. Cold air rushed in, footsteps, heavy, familiar. Elena. The voice cut through the quiet like a knife. I know you're in here. She froze. Every muscle locked. She squeezed her eyes shut for half a second, then forced them open, staring at the man's shoulder, willing herself to disappear. The footsteps came closer. She could smell his cologne. Something sharp and expensive, the same one he wore when he took her to fancy dinners to impress his friends. Come on, he said, voice low but edged with anger. This isn't funny. You think running away makes you strong? You're nothing without me. She didn't answer. Couldn't. Then the man at the bar spoke. Just 2 words, calm and quiet, but they carried through the room like a command. She's with me. The voice wasn't loud, but it stopped everything. Even the soft piano music in the background seemed to pause. She felt more than saw her ex hesitate. What did you say? He asked, stepping closer. The man didn't turn around. He simply lifted his glass, took a slow sip, and said, You heard me. She's with me. And you're making a scene in a place that doesn't appreciate scenes. There was a beat of silence. Then from the corners of the room, 2 other men stood up, dressed like waiters but moving with a stillness that didn't belong in a restaurant. They didn't say anything, just stepped forward, blocking the aisle. Her ex laughed, but it was nervous. Look, man, I don't know who you think you are, but this is between me and my girlfriend. She's not your girlfriend, the man at the bar said, finally turning his head just enough to look over his shoulder. His eyes locked onto her ex's, and something in that look made the other man take a half step back. And if you don't leave right now, you're going to regret ever walking through that door. It wasn't a threat shouted in anger. It was a statement delivered like a fact, and it worked. Her ex glanced at the 2 men now standing between him and the bar. He opened his mouth, closed it, then muttered something under his breath. This isn't over, he said, but it sounded weak, hollow. He turned and walked out, the door slamming behind him. The room exhaled. The piano music resumed. The 2 men returned to their posts, and the man at the bar turned fully to face her. She expected him to ask questions, to demand an explanation, to tell her to leave. Instead, he studied her for a long moment, then gestured to the empty stool beside him. Sit, he said gently. He's gone. She hesitated, but her legs were shaking too badly to stand. She slid onto the stool, keeping her eyes down. You're safe here, he added, signaling the bartender. Espresso, black, and a glass of water. She finally looked up at him. He wasn't handsome in the usual way. His face was lined, his jaw set hard, but his eyes held something unexpected. Patience. Concern, even. Thank you, she whispered, her voice hoarse. He nodded. You don't have to thank me, but you do need to tell me your name. She swallowed. Elena. Elena, he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. My name is Luca. She didn't know it then, but that name would change everything. She didn't know who he was, just a stranger who'd shielded her without asking for anything in return. She didn't see the way the staff watched him with quiet reverence, or how the air in the room shifted when he spoke. She only saw a man who'd kept her safe for one more night. When the espresso came, she wrapped her hands around the tiny cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. Outside, the rain had started again, soft and steady. Inside, for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. Luca didn't press her, didn't ask about the man who'd come looking for her. He just sat with her in silence, giving her space to steady herself. After a while, he said, You can't stay out there tonight. Not after. That She looked at him, wary. I have a room. It's not safe, he said simply. He knows where you are now. Her stomach twisted. He was right. She'd led him straight to her. Luca leaned forward slightly. I have a place nearby, secure. You can stay there tonight. No questions. No expectations. Just a safe place to sleep. She should have said no. Should have walked away, found another motel, kept moving. But exhaustion weighed her down, and the memory of her ex's voice still echoed in her ears. And Luca, there was something about him, not kindness exactly, but strength, the kind that didn't need to prove itself. She nodded. He stood, tossed a few bills on the bar, and gestured for her to follow. As they walked out, she kept close, not touching him, but staying within the space he seemed to guard so naturally. The rain had slicked the streets, reflecting the neon signs and shimmering streaks. He led her to a black sedan parked at the curb. A driver stepped out, opened the back door, and nodded respectfully. She hesitated at the door. It's okay, Luca said quietly. I promise. She got in. The car pulled away from the curb, merging into the flow of traffic along the boardwalk. She watched the lights blur past the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. She didn't know where she was going. Didn't know who this man really was. All she knew was that for the first time in a long time, she wasn't running alone, and somewhere deep down beneath the fear and the uncertainty, a tiny spark of hope flickered to life. Not because she'd escaped, but because someone had chosen to stand between her and the storm. The car didn't drive far, just a few blocks inland, away from the flashing lights and tourist noise of the boardwalk, into a quieter part of town where the buildings were older, taller, and wrapped in shadows. Streetlights flickered here and there, casting long pools of amber on the wet pavement. Elena kept her eyes on the window, arms crossed tightly over her chest, trying to steady her breathing. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't trust herself to speak without her voice shaking. When the car finally stopped, it pulled into a private underground garage beneath a sleek, modern building that looked more like a luxury hotel than an apartment complex. The driver opened her door, and Luca stepped out from the other side, holding an umbrella over her before she even reached the sidewalk. She noticed how the rain barely touched him. He moved like someone used to controlling space, like the world bent slightly around him. They took an elevator straight to the top floor. No stops, no other passengers. The doors opened to a dimly lit hallway with just one door at the end. Luca unlocked it with a keycard, then stepped aside to let her enter first. The apartment took her breath away, not because it was flashy, but because it felt lived in the quietest, most careful way. Warm wood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows showing the ocean in the distance, soft lighting from recessed fixtures, a bookshelf filled with well-worn novels, a kitchen with clean counters and a single coffee mug drying by the sink. It didn't feel like a hideout. It felt like a home. Bathrooms down the hall on the left, Luca said, setting his keys on a console table. There are towels, and clean clothes in the guest room closet, nothing fancy, just basics. She nodded, still not speaking. She walked down the hall slowly, half expecting someone to jump out, half convinced this was all some strange dream. The bathroom was spotless, with thick white towels and a faint scent of sandalwood. She turned on the shower, letting the steam fill the room before stepping under the hot water. For the first time in days, she let herself cry, quiet, shuddering sobs that she muffled with her hand so he wouldn't hear. When she came out wrapped in a towel, she found a set of soft gray sweatpants and a plain white t-shirt folded neatly on the bed in the guest room. She dressed quickly, folding her damp clothes and placing them on a chair. Her reflection in the mirror looked pale, tired but a little less haunted. Back in the living room, Luca was sitting on the couch, a glass of water in his hand. He'd changed into a dark sweater, sleeves pushed up to his elbows, revealing faint scars along his forearms. He didn't look up when she entered, just patted the cushion beside him. She sat, keeping a careful foot of space between them. He won't come back tonight, Luca said after a while. Not after what happened. How do you know? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because men like him, they rely on fear. When someone stands up to them without flinching, it throws them off. They don't know how to handle it. He turned to look at her. You're safe here. For tonight, at least, she swallowed. Why are you doing this? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood and walked to the kitchen, returning with a plate of sliced apples and a small bowl of almonds. He set it on the coffee table between them. Because no one should have to run alone, he said simply. It wasn't a grand speech. It wasn't even particularly kind in the usual way. But it felt honest. And that mattered more than anything. They sat in silence for a while, eating the apples, listening to the distant hum of the city below. Elena watched him out of the corner of her eye. He didn't stare at her, didn't try to make small talk. He just existed in the space with her, calm and steady like an anchor. Eventually, exhaustion pulled at her eyelids. She hadn't slept properly in days. "The guest room's ready," Lucas said, as if reading her mind. "Door locks from the inside. If you need anything in the night, I'm down the hall." She nodded, standing slowly. "Thank you." He gave a small nod back. "Get some rest." She walked to the guest room, closed the door, and turned the lock. The bed was soft, the sheets cool against her skin. She lay there in the dark, listening to the quiet of the apartment, waiting for the panic to return. But it didn't. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without checking the locks twice. She woke to sunlight streaming through the blinds. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The SUV, the restaurant, the stranger who'd shielded her. She sat up quickly, heart pounding, but the room was quiet, safe. She found clean clothes laid out on the dresser, jeans, a soft sweater, fresh underwear. Again, nothing fancy, just what she needed. When she walked into the kitchen, Luca was making coffee. He wore the same dark sweater from last night, hair slightly messy like he'd just woken up too. "Morning," he said without turning. "Coffee's almost ready." She hovered in the doorway. "You didn't have to do all this." "I know," he said, pouring 2 mugs. "But I wanted to." He handed her one. She wrapped her hands around it, letting the warmth sink in. They sat at the small kitchen table, sipping coffee in silence. Outside, the city buzzed to life. Cars, distant sirens, the cry of seagulls. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. After a while, Lucas set his mug down. "What's your plan?" She looked down. "I don't have one." "Not really. I just needed to get away." "He'll keep looking," Lucas said gently. "Men like that don't let go easily." "I know," she whispered. I thought if I disappeared, he'd move on." "Maybe," Lucas said, "but maybe not. And until you're sure you're not safe," she looked up at him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you can stay here a few more days. Figure things out. Get your bearings." He paused. "I have resources. People who can help you disappear for real, if that's what you want." Her eyes widened. "Disappear? Like, change my name?" "Leave the country?" "Not necessarily," he said. "But start fresh. Somewhere he can't find you. Somewhere you can breathe." She didn't know what to say. It sounded too good to be true. And people who offered things that sounded too good to be true usually wanted something in return. "What do you get out of this?" she asked bluntly. He didn't flinch. "Nothing. I told you, no expectations, but why?" she pressed. "You don't even know me." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I've seen what happens when good people are trapped by bad ones. I don't stand by and watch it happen again." There was something in his voice, a weight, a history that told her he wasn't just talking about her. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. They spent the next 2 days in a strange kind of rhythm. Luca left early each morning, dressed in a suit, briefcase in hand, looking like any other businessman. He'd return in the evening, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with a book he thought she might like. He never asked personal questions, never pushed. He just made space for her. She started to relax. She walked around the apartment, read the books on his shelf, even cooked a simple pasta dinner one night. He ate it without comment, but the next day she found fresh basil and good olive oil in the fridge. On the 3rd morning, she woke to the sound of raised voices in the hallway outside the apartment. Her blood ran cold. She crept to the door, pressing her ear against it. "Told you, he's not here," a man's voice said firmly. "I don't care. I know she's in there. Open the door." It was him, her ex. She backed away from the door, hands trembling. She wanted to scream, to run, but there was nowhere to go. Then the apartment door opened. Luca stepped in, calm as ever. Behind him, 2 men, dressed in dark clothes, faces unreadable, stood in the hallway. Her ex was there too, red-faced and shouting. "What the hell is this?" her ex demanded, trying to push past the men. "She's mine. You can't just—" "She's not yours," Luca said, his voice low but sharp as glass. "And if you ever come near this building again, you won't walk away." Her ex laughed, but it was forced. "Or what, you gonna call the cops?" Luca didn't smile. "No, I won't." That seemed to hit harder than any threat. Her ex's bravado altered. He glanced at the two men flanking him, then at Luca's cold eyes, and something in his expression shifted, from anger to fear. "This isn't over," he muttered, but it lacked conviction. He turned and walked away, shoulders hunched. Luca closed the door and locked it. Then he turned to her, still standing in the hallway, pale and shaking. "He's gone," Luca said, "and he won't be back." "How do you know?" she whispered. "Because I made sure of it," he said simply. "I have people who handle things like this quietly, permanently." She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't want to know, but she believed him. That night, over dinner, Luca finally told her the truth. "I'm not just a businessman," he said, setting down his fork. "I'm involved in certain operations, things that exist outside the law." She stared at him. "Are you in the Mafia?" He didn't flinch. "Something like that. My family has been part of this world for generations. I don't brag about it. I don't hide from it either." She felt a chill run through her. She'd suspected there was too much quiet power around him, too many men who moved like shadows, but hearing it out loud was different. "Does that mean you're dangerous?" she asked. "I can be," he said honestly. "But not to you. Never to you." She believed him. Not because he said so, but because of how he'd treated her, respectfully, patiently, without pressure. He could have taken advantage a dozen times over. He hadn't. "I don't want to be part of that world," she said quietly. "You won't be," he promised. "You'll have your own life, your own space. I'll protect you, but I won't pull you into my mess." She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. Over the next week, things changed. Luca introduced her to a woman named Rosa, a sharp-eyed, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who ran a small design studio downtown. "She needs work," Luca told Rosa. "Something quiet. Something that uses her hands." Rosa took one look at Elena's portfolio, sketches, logo designs, website mock-ups, and offered her a part-time job starting the next day. "We pay cash," Rosa said. "No paperwork. No questions." It wasn't much, but it was a start. A real start. Luca also arranged for a new ID under a different name, with a new address in a nearby town. "Just in case," he said. "You don't have to use it unless you need to." She didn't ask how he got it. She just accepted it, tucking it into her wallet like a secret lifeline. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the sunset paint the ocean in golden pink, she finally asked the question that had been burning in her chest. "Why me?" she said. "Out of everyone in that restaurant, why did you help me?" Luca was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because when you hid behind me, you weren't trying to use me. You were just scared, and you didn't ask for help, you just needed a shield." That kind of honesty, it's rare. She looked at him, really looked at him, not as a stranger, not as a protector, but as a person. Flawed, complicated, human. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there," she admitted. "You would have survived," he said. "You're stronger than you think." Maybe. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The weeks passed like pages turning in a book she hadn't realized she was writing. Mornings began with coffee on the balcony, the ocean stretching out like a promise. She'd started her job at the design studio, small tasks at first, fixing layouts, sketching ideas for local shop logos, but Rosa quickly saw her talent and gave her more responsibility. The work felt good, real, like she was building something of her own, brick by quiet brick. Luca kept his word. He never asked her to be part of his world. He left early, came home late, and never brought his business into the apartment. When he was there, they talked about ordinary things: books, the weather, the strange seagull that kept stealing fries from the boardwalk vendors. He listened when she spoke, really listened, and never interrupted or tried to fix things unless she asked. It was the kind of quiet companionship she'd never known was possible. She'd stopped jumping at every knock on the door, stopped checking over her shoulder on the street. Even her dreams had changed, less running, more standing still, breathing deep. Then one rainy Tuesday, everything shifted. She was walking back from the studio, umbrella in hand, humming a song she'd heard on the radio, when she saw the man. Not her ex, someone else. Tall, sharp suit, standing too still near the bus stop. He watched her as she passed. Didn't smile. Didn't look away. Just watched, her stomach tightened. She picked up her pace, heart thudding, but didn't run. Running drew attention. Instead, she ducked into a coffee shop 2 blocks from the apartment, ordered a tea she didn't drink, and called Luca. He answered on the first ring. "Are you okay?" he asked before she could even speak. "I think I was followed," she said, voice low. "A man in a gray suit. Near the studio." There was a pause. "Then stay where you are. Don't leave the shop. I'll be there in 10 minutes. True to his word, he arrived in 9. He didn't come in through the front. She saw him approach from the side alley, scanning the street like a soldier. When he stepped inside, his eyes found hers instantly. He didn't say a word, just nodded and led her out the back door to a waiting car. On the drive home, he finally spoke. "His name is Vincent. He works for a rival group, small time but dangerous. They've been testing our boundaries lately." "Why would he follow me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because you're with me," Luca said quietly, "and in this world that makes you a target." The words landed like stones in her chest. She'd known in theory that being near him came with risks, but hearing it out loud, knowing someone had watched her, marked her, made it real in a way she couldn't ignore. That night over dinner, Luca laid it out plainly. "I can't promise you'll never be in danger, but I can promise I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe. Always." She believed him. But belief didn't erase fear. The next few days were tense. Luca doubled security. New locks, a silent alarm system, a man stationed near the building entrance who nodded at her every morning like a silent guardian. She hated it. Hated feeling like a prisoner in her own life, even if the cage was gilded. Then came the night she saw it. She'd woken up thirsty and gone to the kitchen for water. The living room was dark, but the balcony door was open a crack. She heard voices, low, urgent. She crept closer, staying in the shadows. Luca stood with his back to her, facing 2 men she'd never seen before. One of them held a phone, showing Luca something on the screen. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw Luca's posture shift, shoulders stiffening, jaw tightening. Then, without warning, he grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it hard, and slammed him against the railing. The man grunted in pain, but didn't cry out. "Don't ever bring that filth near her," Luca growled, voice so cold it made her shiver. "You understand me?" The man nodded quickly. Luca released him, then turned and walked back inside, shutting the balcony door behind him. She barely had time to slip back to her room before he entered the hallway. She lay in bed, pretending to sleep, heart pounding. He paused outside her door for a long moment, then walked away. The next morning, she couldn't look at him. Every time he spoke, she heard that voice, the one that could cut like ice. She kept her distance, ate breakfast in her room, left for work early. He noticed. Of course he did. That evening, he found her on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the ocean. "You're scared of me," he said. Not as an accusation, but as a fact. She didn't deny it. "I saw what you did last night." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That man was showing me photos of you, taken outside the studio, outside the coffee shop. They were planning to use them." To send a message, her blood ran cold. "What did you do to him?" "I made sure he'd never take another photo of you again," Luca said. "I didn't hurt him badly, but I made it clear, touch her, look at her wrong, even think about her, and they answer to me." She turned to face him. "That's not protection, Luca, that's control." "No," he said firmly. "It's consequence. There's a difference." She wanted to argue, but the truth was she didn't want those men near her, didn't want their eyes on her. And if Luca's warning kept them away, wasn't that a kind of safety? But at what cost? The real test came a week later. She was at the studio working late on a brochure design when Rosa came in looking grim. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Says he's your brother." Her stomach dropped. She knew instantly who it was. She walked to the front of the studio slowly, dread pooling in her chest. And there he was, her ex. Clean-shaven, wearing a nice coat, holding a bouquet of white lilies, he looked normal, respectable, like the man she'd first fallen for before the cracks showed. "Elena," he said softly, stepping forward. "Please, I just want to talk." She didn't move. "You're not my brother, and you're not welcome here." "I made mistakes," he said, voice breaking. "I know that, but I've changed. I went to therapy. I've been clean, no drinking, no anger. I miss you. I can't sleep knowing you're out here alone." It was the old song, the one that had trapped her before. The guilt, the pity, the hope that maybe, just maybe, he really had changed. For a second she wavered, then she remembered the doorknob bruise. The way he'd screamed at her for burning toast. The night she'd spent crying in the bathroom so he wouldn't hear. "No," she said, stronger this time. "You don't get to do this, not after everything." His face hardened, just for a second. But she saw it, the flash of anger beneath. The sadness. "You think you're better off with him?" he spat. "That man you're hiding with? Do you even know who he really is?" Her blood ran cold. "Get out." He leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. "I know what he is. And when this all blows up, you'll be the one left holding the pieces." Then he turned and walked away. Leaving the flowers on the counter, she stood there, shaking, until Rosa came over and put a hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" Rosa asked. She nodded, but she wasn't. That night she told Luca everything. About the visit, the flowers, the threat hidden in his words. Luca listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stood and walked to the window. "He won't bother you again," he said. "How?" she asked, fear rising in her throat. "What are you going to do?" "I'm not going to hurt him," Luca said, turning to face her. "But I'm going to make sure he can't hurt you, ever again." 2 days later, she saw the news. Her ex had been arrested. Not for stalking, not for threats, but for financial fraud, embezzling from his own company, falsifying documents, laundering money through shell accounts. The charges were serious. Bail was denied. She stared at the screen, stunned. She knew he was greedy, dishonest, but this? It felt too neat, too convenient. She confronted Luca that evening. "Did you set him up?" she asked, voice low. He didn't deny it. "I didn't create the crimes. He committed them. I just made sure the right people found the evidence." She sat down heavily. "You ruined his life. I saved yours," he said gently. "He was never going to stop, Elena. Not really, this way. He's locked away and you're free." She wanted to be angry, wanted to say it wasn't her place to decide his fate. But the truth was, a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying lifted off her shoulders. For the first time, she believed it might really be over. Still, that night she lay awake thinking about the line between justice and vengeance. Between protection and possession, Luca had given her safety. But had he also taken something from her? Her right to choose her own path, even if it was messy. The next morning, she found him in the kitchen making coffee. "I need to understand something," she said, sitting across from him. "If I asked you to walk away, if I said I wanted to handle things on my own, would you?" He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Yes, just like that." No argument. "No guilt, but I'd worry," he added. "And I'd be here if you changed your mind." She studied his face, the lines around his eyes, the quiet strength in his posture. He wasn't trying to control her. He was offering her a choice. And that changed everything. Over the next few weeks, she started to see him differently. Not just as her protector, but as a man shaped by a world he hadn't chosen. A world that demanded hardness, but hadn't killed his capacity for kindness. One evening, she found an old photo on his bookshelf, him as a boy, standing beside an older woman with kind eyes. "Who's that?" she asked. "My grandmother," he said, coming up behind her. "She raised me after my parents, after they were gone." "She looks gentle." "She was," he said softly. "She used to say, 'Power means nothing if you don't protect the ones who can't protect themselves.' I never forgot that." In that moment, she understood. His violence wasn't cruelty, it was armor. For himself and for those he cared about. She reached out, touched his arm lightly. "Thank you," she said. He looked down at her hand, then at her face. "For what?" "For seeing me. Not just the woman who ran, but the one who's trying to stand." He didn't say anything, just covered her hand with his for a brief second before stepping back. But that small touch said everything. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was learning to trust, not blindly, but with eyes wide open, knowing the risks and choosing to stay anyway. And Luca? He wasn't just keeping her safe. He was giving her space to heal, to grow, to become someone new. The gilded cage hadn't vanished, but she was starting to see that the door had never been locked. She just hadn't believed she was allowed to walk through it. Now, for the first time, she did. The seasons turned. Summer bled into fall, and the air grew crisp with the scent of salt and burning leaves. She'd been living in Luca's world for nearly 6 months now, and the lines between safety and surrender had blurred in ways she hadn't expected. She had her own routine. Work at the studio, walks along the quieter end of the boardwalk, evenings reading on the balcony with a cup of tea. She even started sketching again, not just for clients, but for herself. Seascapes, faces, fragments of dreams she couldn't quite explain. Luca never crossed the line she'd drawn. He slept in his room, she in hers. They shared meals, conversations, silence, but never more. And yet something had shifted between them. It wasn't romance, not exactly. It was deeper. A quiet understanding, like two people who'd weathered storms alone and now stood side by side, not needing to speak to know the other was there. But peace, she was learning, was fragile. It started with a phone call. She was at the studio, finalizing a logo for a local bakery, when Rosa handed her a sealed envelope. "Came for you," she said, eyebrows raised. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Her breath caught. It was her, taken weeks ago, walking out of the coffee shop, hair loose, smiling at something on her phone. The angle was intimate, invasive. On the back, written in neat script, "You think you're safe? He can't protect you forever." Her hands shook. She showed it to Rosa, who immediately called Luca. He arrived within minutes. Calm on the surface, but she saw the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes scanned the street before he even stepped inside. "Who sent this?" he asked, voice low. "I don't know," she whispered, "but they're watching me again." He didn't say anything, just folded the photo, tucked it into his coat, and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Pack a bag. You're staying somewhere else for a few days." She wanted to protest. She was tired of running, tired of hiding, but the fear in her gut was real. So she nodded. That night, instead of the apartment, Luca took her to a small house on the edge of town, tucked behind tall pines and a rusted gate. It was modest. Wooden floors, a stone fireplace, shelves lined with old books. Nothing like his penthouse. This felt personal. "This was my grandmother's," he said, lighting a fire. "No one knows about it." She stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "How many safe houses do you have?" "Enough," he said simply. "But this one's different. It's mine. Not the family's, just mine." She looked at him then, not as her protector, but as a man carrying secrets even he didn't fully share. Over the next few days, he stayed with her. Not in the same room, but close. He cooked simple meals. Pasta, roasted vegetables, fresh bread from a bakery down the road. They talked more than they ever had. About his childhood, about the weight of leading a family business that operated in shadows, about the loneliness of power. "I didn't choose this life," he said one evening, staring into the fire. "But once you're in it, there's no clean way out. You either run it or it runs you." She listened, really listened, and for the first time she saw the cost of his strength, the sleepless nights, the decisions that couldn't be undone, the constant calculation behind every word, every move. And then, one afternoon, it happened. She was in the kitchen washing dishes when she heard shouting outside. She froze, soap dripping from her hands. Luca was already at the window, phone to his ear, voice sharp. She crept to the door and peeked out. Two men stood at the edge of the driveway. Strangers, dressed in dark jackets. One held a bat. The other had a phone pressed to his ear, eyes scanning the house. Luca stepped outside, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed but eyes like steel. "What do you want?" he asked, voice calm. "The girl," one of them said. "Hand her over and we walk away." Luca didn't flinch. "You don't get to walk away from my property and live to talk about it," the man with the bat laughed. Big words for a man outnumbered. But Luca wasn't alone. From the trees at the edge of the yard, two figures emerged, silent, steady. The men at the driveway froze. What happened next wasn't a fight. It was over in seconds. Luca didn't throw a punch. He just spoke, low, fast, in a language she didn't understand. The two intruders paled. One dropped the bat. They backed away, got in their car, and sped off. Luca stood there for a long moment, watching the dust settle. Then he turned and came back inside. She was waiting in the hallway, arms wrapped around herself. "Who were they?" she asked, voice trembling. "Messengers," he said, "from a rival faction. They're testing me, seeing if I've gone soft, because of me," she whispered. He looked at her, really looked at her. "Because I care about you, and in their world that's a weakness." She turned away, tears burning her eyes. "I can't do this, Luca. I can't keep living like this, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if today's the day someone comes for me. Or for you. He stepped closer but didn't touch her. Then don't. She looked up, confused. I'm not asking you to stay in this life, he said. I never have. I can give you a new identity, clean, legal, untraceable. A fresh start in another state. A job, a home, money to get settled. You'd never have to see me again. Never have to worry about this world, her breath caught. You'd let me go? In a heartbeat, he said. If that's what you want, she stared at him, heart pounding. This was it, the choice she'd been circling for months. Safety with him, shadowed by danger. Or freedom without him, but truly on her own. But there was a third option, one she hadn't dared consider. What if I stay? She asked softly. Not as your whatever I am now, but as someone who chooses to be here, with you. On my terms, he went very still. What would those terms be? No secrets, she said, no lies. You don't pull me into your business, and I don't pretend it doesn't exist. I keep my job, my independence, and if I ever say I need space, you give it to me. No questions. He studied her for a long time. Then he nodded. Done. But there's one more thing, she said. If I stay, I need to know everything. Not the details of your work, but who you really are. The good and the hard parts. All of it. He exhaled slowly. That's fair. They sat by the fire that night, and for the first time, he told her the truth. Not just about the threats, but about the choices he'd made. The people he'd lost. The lines he'd crossed to keep his family, and now her, safe. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Just understanding, and she gave it. Not because she approved of everything, but because she saw the man beneath the myth, the one who carried guilt like a second skin, who protected fiercely because he'd once been powerless himself. The next morning, she called Rosa and told her she'd be back at the studio on Monday. Then she packed her bag and walked out to the car where Luca waited. As they drove back to the city, she watched the trees blur past the window. Why now? He asked quietly. Why choose to stay? She turned to him. Because I finally believe I'm not just hiding with you. I'm building something. With you, he didn't smile, but his hand, resting on the steering wheel, relaxed just a little. Back at the apartment, she unpacked slowly. This time she didn't keep her things separate. She hung her clothes in the closet beside his, left her sketchbook on the coffee table, placed her grandmother's photo on the bookshelf next to his. That evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the sunset, she said, I'm scared. I know, he said, but I'm staying anyway. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something raw in his eyes. Relief, maybe. Or hope. Then I'll spend every day proving you made the right choice, he said. She didn't answer. She just reached over and took his hand, and he let her. No grand gestures. No promises of forever. Just two people choosing each other. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. The threats didn't stop overnight. But they changed. Luca handled them quietly, firmly, always keeping her out of the storm. And she, in turn, stopped flinching at every knock on the door. She started sleeping through the night. Started dreaming of a future, not just survival, but life. One afternoon, she found an old box in the back of his closet. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied with a faded ribbon. She didn't read them, but she saw the dates, all written to the same person. Over years, she left the box where it was. But that night she asked, was there someone before me? He hesitated. A long time ago. She couldn't handle this life. I didn't blame her. Do you still think about her? Sometimes, he admitted. But not like this. Like what? Like I think about you, he said simply. Like you're part of the air I breathe. She didn't know what to say to that. So she just leaned her head on his shoulder and they watched the stars come out. The world outside was still dangerous. But inside their quiet corner of it, something tender was growing, rooted not in fear, but in choice, and for the first time, she believed it could last. Winter came softly that year, more mist than snow, more quiet than storm. The city slowed down, wrapped in gray skies and the hush of early evenings. She'd grown used to the rhythm of their life together. Mornings with coffee and the newspaper spread across the kitchen table. Afternoons at the studio where her designs now carried her own name on the client contracts. Evenings curled on the couch with a book or a movie, Luca's presence a steady warmth beside her. They didn't rush, didn't pretend the past had vanished. But they built something new anyway. brick by careful brick, word by honest word. Then one cold morning in January, the past knocked on the door. She was sorting mail when she saw it. A plain white envelope with no return address, but her old name written in handwriting she'd hoped never to see again. Her stomach dropped. She almost threw it away unread, but something made her open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Not a threat this time. A plea. I'm in trouble. Real trouble. They're saying I stole money I didn't take. I know you're with him now. I heard what he did. But please, if you have any mercy left, tell him to stop. I'll disappear, I swear. Just don't let them lock me up for life. Her hands shook. She read it 3 times, searching for the old manipulation, the familiar guilt trip. But this felt different. Desperate. Raw. She found Luca in his study, reviewing papers at his desk. She didn't say anything, just handed him the letter. He read it slowly, face unreadable. When he looked up, his eyes were heavy. He's in county jail, Luca said. The charges are real, but the evidence, it was messy. I made sure it got cleaned up. She sat down across from him. You framed him? No, he said firmly. I exposed what was already there. He stole from his clients, lied on tax returns, took kickbacks. I just made sure the authorities saw it all at once. She believed him, but that didn't ease the knot in her chest. What happens to him now? She asked. Trial in 2 months. If convicted, 10 years minimum. She looked out the window. The man who'd once made her feel small, who'd twisted love into control, was facing real consequences. Part of her wanted to feel satisfaction, but all she felt was sadness, for the years she'd lost, for the person he might have been if he'd chosen differently. I want to see him, she said quietly. Luca didn't argue, didn't try to talk her out of it. He just nodded. I'll arrange it. 2 days later, she sat across from him in a visitation room, glass between them, phones on either side. He looked older, thinner. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something hollow. You came, he said, voice rough. I did, she replied. I didn't think you would. I almost didn't. He looked down at his hands, cuffed in front of him. I messed up bad, not just with you, with everything. I thought power meant getting what I wanted, but it just made me lonely. She didn't offer comfort, didn't pretend to forgive, but she listened. When the guard signaled time was up, he looked at her one last time. I hope he treats you right. He does, she said. Better than you ever did. He nodded, eyes wet. Good. She walked out without looking back. That night over dinner, Luca asked, How do you feel? Free, she said. Really free. Not because he's locked up, but because I finally stopped waiting for him to change. I stopped carrying him with me. Luca reached across the table and covered her hand with his. You've earned that. A week later, something unexpected happened. A detective showed up at the studio, not in uniform, just a man in a suit with kind eyes and a notebook. He asked Rosa if Elena was available. When she came out, he introduced himself and said, We're investigating financial crimes tied to your former partner. We believe you might have information that could help. Her first instinct was fear, old fear, the kind that made her want to run. But she took a breath and said, What do you need? She told them everything. About the hidden accounts, the fake invoices, the way he'd pressured clients into signing blank checks. She didn't exaggerate, didn't lie, just spoke the truth calmly, clearly. Afterward, the detective thanked her. You just helped put away a con artist who's hurt dozens of people. You did the right thing. She walked home that evening feeling lighter than she had in years. She hadn't done it for revenge. She'd done it because it was right. And that, more than anything, made her feel like herself again. Back at the apartment, Luca was waiting. He didn't ask what happened, just handed her a cup of tea and said, You look like you've set something down. I have, she said. For good. As the weeks passed, she threw herself into her work with a new kind of energy. She started designing branding for small local businesses, bakeries, bookshops, a community art center. Her style was clean, warm, full of life. People noticed. Orders poured in. One afternoon, Rosa called her into the office. There's an offer, she said, smiling. A real one. A firm in Portland wants to bring you on full-time. Great pay. Creative freedom. They saw your portfolio. Elena's heart leapt, then sank. Portland was far. A fresh start. Exactly what she'd once dreamed of. That night, she told Luca. He listened quietly, stirring his coffee. When she finished, he said, "You should go." She blinked. "Just like that? You've built something real here," he said. "But that doesn't mean you owe me your future. If Portland calls you, answer." She studied his face, looking for the catch, the hidden plea, but there was none. "Just honesty. What if I don't want to go?" she asked. He looked at her then, really looked at her. "Then stay. Not because you're afraid to leave, but because you choose to." She thought about it for days. Walked the boardwalk at dawn, sat in quiet cafes, sketched the ocean until her hand ached. And in the end, she knew. She turned down the offer, not because she was trapped, but because she'd found something worth staying for, not just Luca, though he was part of it, but the life they'd built together. The trust, the quiet strength of knowing someone sees you, all of you, and still chooses you every day. She told him her decision on a Friday evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and violet. "I'm staying," she said. He didn't smile right away, just took her hand and held it. "Why?" "Because I finally feel like I belong. Not in spite of this life, but within it. With you, on my own terms," he nodded slowly. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small key.